I jumped into a cooling system overhaul, and it turned out to be in terrible shape. A clogged radiator, a completely stuck thermostat, leaking gaskets in hard-to-reach spots, a worn-out water pump barely scraping by, an extremely old coolant that literally smells like rust. In this episode, I'll show you step-by-step how I rebuilt the entire system so it now runs like it just rolled off the factory line. Let's get to work. The whole story starts with an engine that just wouldn't reach operating temperature. While driving, it would max out at around 60 degrees Celsius, and the needle wouldn't budge any higher, even under hard driving. So, the decision was made. I'm replacing the thermostat. But as it turned out, during the repair, I stumbled upon a few extra surprises that I'm going to tell you all about. Let's start this story right from the beginning so you know exactly what to do if it ever happens to you. The drain plug on my radiator is broken off, so to do anything with the cooling system, I first have to drain the fluid. I'm making some extra room by removing the engine acoustic cover, pushing the front bracket to the side, and pulling out the fan to set it aside. I can already tell I'm in for a bit of a challenge because the whole space between the two radiators is completely clogged up. But first, I'm placing a bucket or pan under one side and disconnecting a coolant hose as a quick backup plan to drain the fluid. You can't do it the normal way because the plug is stuck inside, and there's no way to unscrew it. So what I'm doing now is a quick alternative workaround. As soon as everything drains out, I disconnect the remaining water outlet flanges and carefully pull the whole radiator out. After years, maybe even over a decade, without a proper clean, this whole assembly looks like this. Truth be told, I've got my work cut out for me, but it's not a total disaster, and we'll have it sorted in no time. I'll start by removing that old drain plug stuck inside. To do that, I'm heating up a flathead screwdriver with a torch and melting it deep into the plastic so I can try backing it out once it cools down. Luckily, the trick worked and saved me from buying a whole new radiator, so that's a win. I'm installing a new coolant drain plug, wetting the O-rings with fresh coolant to reduce friction. I ordered the genuine OEM plug straight from the dealership because I don't want to snap another cheap aftermarket one next time around. I'll get back to the radiator in just a second, but first, I'm going to prep a clean area for the reinstall, since there's still a lot of gunk left behind in the engine bay. I'm using a vacuum to suck up the top loose layer of debris, but it definitely won't get everything. You can see for yourself just how hard this buildup is. It's a caked-on mixture of dust, mud, and organic gunk that's practically glued together. Using an ultra-soft toothbrush, I'm scrubbing away as thoroughly as possible while being super careful with the cooling fins, since I don't want to bend or damage any of them. Some people say you can just pressure wash it with a Kärcher, but honestly, I've never done it that way and didn't want to risk ruining the radiator, so I'm doing it all by hand. It's looking pretty decent right now, and once I finish up, I'm dropping the radiator back into place. Now it's time for the star of the show, the leaking water pump. It's causing me to lose about a liter of coolant every 1,000 kilometers, which is pretty crazy, right? I'm fixing that and replacing the thermostat while I'm at it. I start by loosening the tensioner on the AC belt and taking it off. I remove the main serpentine belt the exact same way. The only difference is you need a larger socket and a bit more muscle, since the whole setup is bigger and under more tension. Coolant is definitely going to spill when pulling the pump from the engine block, so I'm catching it underneath to keep from making a mess on the garage floor. To give myself a bit more breathing room, I unscrew and pull out the intake pipe running from the air filter to the turbo. Then I try to get to the 4 bolts holding the water pump in place. You can't really see them from above, so I'm using my phone's flashlight to help aim right at the bolt heads. The second the pump gives way, a whole waterfall comes pouring out underneath the car. Honestly, I wasn't expecting quite that much fluid. While that whole Niagara Falls finishes draining out, please hit that like button or leave a comment. It seriously helps me out a ton with growing the channel. But once everything drains out, I pull the entire assembly, pump and thermostat included, straight out. Now for the interesting part, this is the exact spot where the leak started. Everything is dark, dirty, and soaked, so I'm going to have some fun getting this all cleaned up. I'm pulling off the old, worn-out gasket to see what's going on underneath, and the good news is I don't see any cracks in the engine block, so we're in good shape. The water pump itself isn't looking quite as great. I can hear this grinding crunch, which tells me something is definitely going wrong inside. Luckily, I already have a brand new OE replacement with the exact same part number. Once it's in, I'll have peace of mind for years to come. But before we get to that, I need to clean up the pump mating surface. Using a special abrasive pad, I polish the surface until it's completely smooth. Quick pro tip here. If you use sandpaper, there's a huge chance you'll grind down the metal too deep and the metal gasket will never seal the way it should. Either way, for this repair, I'm going to seal the new pump right away using liquid gasket maker. I'm honestly not 100% sure I'd get a proper seal with just the metal gasket, and I really don't want to come back in here to redo this job. Durco silicone will definitely do the trick. Before installing the pump, I'm pulling out the excess coolant from the passage. If it leaks out during installation, there's a real risk the silicone won't bond properly. Before gluing the pump in place, I degrease the entire surface. The engine block isn't pristine. It has darker spots left over from the old gasket. That's just polymer baked into the micro imperfections, but it won't give us any trouble. Without oversanding it, I, or the next owner down the line, can still install a metal gasket in the future instead of silicone. I also degrease the edges of the pump itself so the sealant adheres properly, just like it should. Now, I'm applying an even bead of silicone, trying to lay it down as precisely as possible without overdoing it. In this case, using too much means it'll squeeze out the sides as the bolts are tightened, and if there's excess silicone, it'll eventually break off over time and clog up a radiator line or something else. Once it's on, I leave it to sit for 10 minutes so it can tack up and draw a bit of moisture from the air. In the meantime, I blow out the bolt holes in the engine block so no trapped liquid interferes with getting a proper torque on the bolts. Now for the trickiest part. You have to line up, press down, and bolt the pump in place without messing up that fresh silicone. What more can I say? I actually had to do it twice myself, because the first attempt turned out so bad it's better left off camera. But on the second try, once I got it aligned right where it needed to be, I hand-threaded the bolts first to hold it in place, then torqued them down in a cross pattern to the proper spec. After that, you have to leave it to cure completely, and I'm using this little dab of squeezed-out silicone as a tester. When I came back to the garage the next morning, it was completely dry and flexible. That means we can move forward with the job and install the new thermostat. I opted for quality here as well and ordered it directly from the official store, since the internet is flooded with knockoffs. This is what the water pump looks like now that the sealant has cured. Even though we applied very little silicone, a bit still squeezed out around the edges. With the amount you see here, it's completely acceptable, as long as you don't try to tear or trim it off. Left just as it cured, it'll hold strong for years. Here's what the old thermostat looked like. It was completely coated in limescale, which caused it to get stuck in the open position. On the new part, I first wet the seals with fresh coolant so the water hose flanges slide in easier. As soon as I get it properly seated, I tighten the 4 mounting bolts, securing it to the water pump. Again, using a cross pattern and strictly with a torque wrench. The rest is just a formality. I reconnect all the remaining coolant hoses to close up the system. At the very end, I put the main serpentine belt back on, exactly the way it was routed before, after checking it for any cracks or age, of course, so I'm not reinstalling a worn-out belt. This one is 2 years old and still in great shape. Next, I install the smaller AC belt, drop the cooling fan back into place, and secure it with the front bracket to wrap up this section. Now, if you think we're all done, not quite, we're not there just yet. Before I pour in fresh coolant and bleed the system, I have to replace this piece right here, the water flange, which snapped off during removal. I caught it just in time to avoid a total disaster. To get access to it, I'm pulling off the intake manifold along with the EGR valve and the throttle body. With that piece out of the way, I have incredible access to the water flange. I disconnect 2 coolant hoses. Nothing should really spill out of them at this point. And finally, unscrew the plastic flange itself, which isn't going down without a fight since it's jammed in there pretty tight. The flange's gasket is completely shot, which explains why I noticed drops of coolant back when I was replacing the glow plug control module. Mystery solved. I clean up the mating surface on the engine block for the new gasket, first using a carbon remover and then a degreaser. Ready to go, I have a brand new water flange, which together with the new thermostat and water pump should let me completely forget about the cooling system for the next few years. I bolt the new piece down using a torque wrench, since it's plastic. By the way, I actually found an aluminum version of this flange online, and I'm really curious if those are truly immortal. If you're running one, let me know in the comments. Next, the intake manifold goes back into place, And once everything is bolted down, it's time for the final and most important step: cleaning out all the remaining components from the inside using a special chemical flush. I pour it straight into the expansion tank and top off the rest with distilled water. I'm not using actual coolant at this stage because everything will have to be drained after the flush anyway, and fresh coolant would just go to waste. You remember what the inside of the old thermostat looked like, right? Completely covered in scale, which eventually jammed it shut. That exact same buildup is sitting inside the engine block and the radiator, and what we're doing now will get rid of it once and for all. After emptying the can, I unscrew the two bleed screws to let out any trapped air. I jump inside and start the engine, and with the cap off, you can see things starting to happen in the short cooling circuit. Foam and bubbles begin to appear. That's our sign that the flush is circulating. I cap the reservoir, and with the car parked and idling, I give it some time for the solution to circulate and do its job. The engine needs time to pump the chemical through every dirty corner of the radiator, and driving around would just heat up the whole engine way too fast. This product foams up heavily and causes cavitation bubbles, making driving with it inside far from safe. Once the engine gets up to temperature, you have to turn it off. Otherwise, it'll get airlocked first and then overheat. Once the engine cools down completely, I drain the entire mixture into a jerry can. You can see for yourself just how much it foams up, almost like dish soap. And this is where the hardest part begins: flushing every last bit of that cleaning agent out of the system, which won't be easy. Why is this so crucial? If I don't do it right, the active chemicals in the flush will stay active during heat cycles and eventually eat through the gaskets, causing leaks. On top of that, if too much residue is left behind, it'll keep foaming up, causing the engine to airlock itself and overheat in spots. And I think we both know what that leads to. That's why after draining everything out, I'm not pouring in fresh coolant just yet. I'm filling it strictly with distilled water to rinse out any remaining chemical flush. After filling it to the top, I unscrew all the bleeders again and warm up the car without driving for about 10 to 15 minutes so the fluid inside can circulate and mix thoroughly. Once the engine cools down completely, I drain out the remaining mix of old coolant, liquid moly flush, distilled water, and all the loosened dirt from the cooling system. Unfortunately, I've got some bad news here. A single flush just isn't going to cut it. Even after draining it all, about 2 liters of fluid remain trapped inside the engine block and heater core. Because of that, I have to run several distilled water flushes. In my case, it took 5 rounds, and only after the 5th flush was the system clean enough that the water stopped foaming. The worst thing you can do in a situation like this is ignore the foam and drive around with a system that isn't completely clean, because that will most likely kill the engine within a few thousand or maybe a couple dozen thousand kilometers. That's why only after the 5th flush, when I knew the system was clean enough that the water stopped foaming completely, did I feel confident moving on to the final step. I'm pouring in brand new, spec-matched blue coolant, which together with the new thermostat, water pump, and clean system will let me push the car hard on the road without any fear of overheating for the next 3 years. After one last professional 3-step air bleeding process, which I covered in depth in a separate video so I don't bore you here, we're finally ready to hit the road safely. The cooling system is just one of those components that can kill your car for good. If you want to know the other 6, check out my video on the top 7 reasons cars end up in the scrapyard prematurely. I hope none of them ever catch you off guard.